Hey, this is Marques Colston, former 10-year NFL vet and Super Bowl champion, current CEO of Marques Colston Enterprises. This is the game plan.
Marques Colston, thank you so much for joining us on the game plan today.
I appreciate you guys having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, of course. I know we were just chatting before we got on the mic that about 2 years ago was when you and I first connected and pitched this idea of what has now become the game plan. And so finally, 2 years later, it's an honor to have you on.
No, it's a totally different world now, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah, exactly. And we'll get into some of that. So before we jump into it, let's talk a little bit about when you started thinking about life after the NFL and what came next for you.
Yeah, I call myself one of the lucky ones in that I had two advisors that were on my financial advisory team that were former players themselves. So I got a chance to start seeing what transition looked like literally in my second year as a pro. And, them kind of going through the experience. One was a 10-year NFL vet. The other was an 11-year NFL vet. They always kind of pushed me and urged me to start thinking about the end in the beginning. And it allowed me to get a jump start to where I was involved in business opportunities while I was still really at the height of my career. What it allowed for was a chance to get my feet wet, really learn what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do, make the mistakes that we're all going to make, as first timers. And it really just set the stage for me to transition out of sports with a much better lens on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to focus my time and energy.
So that being said, you were a seventh round pick out of Hofstra, but went on to, I think it was a 10-year NFL career, which kind of blows any standard, like 2.5, 3-year barrier. You went way past that, had a really successful career. I think there's still lots of friends I could talk to about all the amazing fantasy performances you had for them and championships you led teams to. But you mentioned like being focused on the off the field stuff and very early in your career, but do you think like that helped propel you on the field as well? Like focus on what's important first, but also be prepared for anything that comes your way?
Yeah, in a lot of ways it did. When I initially got into business, I was in an off season where I was kind of averaging an off season surgery every year, right? So there was always a portion of the beginning of the off season where I was rehabbing. This particular season, I think I had microfracture surgery, so I couldn't really train. I couldn't do anything for a while. So business just kind of popped on the radar as a way to occupy some time in the off season. And, I started to, as I dug into it more and more, I started to realize, how passionate I could become about it. And what I ended up finding out was, as I dove deep in business in the off season, it gave me that chance to kind of unplug mentally from the game. And I was still training, physically and still always with that mindset to continue to get better. But mentally, I was able to unplug and by allocating that energy, that mental energy in another place, by the time I got back to training camp, I kind of missed the game. So in a lot of ways, it started to kind of reinvigorate my game. By the time the fall rolled around, it was time to play. I missed it. And it just started to create this balance that I didn't know that I needed at the time.
I feel like with some of the athletes that are maybe still currently playing or sort of this generation of players, being that multi-hyphenate, the social media guy, and you're playing esports, but you're also a wide receiver, that's a little bit more common. I think during the time that you were playing, it was maybe a little bit less so. And I think we hear from a lot of players that sense of identity gets a little bit lost. Talk to us a little bit about maybe that mental side of it as you were transitioning out of the league, where that sense of identity came from in going into business.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me because, that identity never really left. And it kind of became a double-edged sword in a lot of ways because the identity as an NFL player, it gets you access. It gets you into the rooms that you want to be in. It sparks conversations that you want to happen. But the other side of that sword is you get introduced into these rooms in this box. And, sometimes and I know for me, it was really hard to figure out, how do I break outside of this box, right? And you find yourself kind of working counterintuitively and working against your own progress at times Trying to balance that, when do I use this NFL player card, and when do I just want to be here because I add value, and trying to figure out where that value is. And there's the value that you feel like you produce, but then there's the thought process around how is this value being received. And that balancing act, for me was really tough for a couple of years.
Yeah, we've heard this from some other guests on the game plan as well. And, it's a specialty of yours in an even greater way because you are a former athlete, pro athlete, and you're now teaching other pro athletes kind of the same thing, helping navigate through this transition. But it almost sounds like there's a little bit of imposter syndrome that maybe went on there. Was that true for you?
Yeah, there's definitely. I think, it's funny. I went through that stage at a couple of different stages. It feels like in every new thing that you take on, there's kind of this invisible wall that you got to break through. And, the thing that helped me the most, I believe, is in playing the sport that I played and playing the position that I played, and, being a 7th round pick and having these odds in front of me, really my entire career. I started to adopt the same mindset and the same mentality that, if I'm here, I'm going to give 100%, 110% of what I have. And, at some point it's going to be judged and it's going to be good enough or not. Right. And,
yeah.
In a lot of ways, sports is really black and white in that way. It's either good enough or it's not. You make the roster, you don't. You start, you don't. You get cut. And it's easy to adapt that mentality in sports, but it's a little harder, once you get into the business world, because it's not as objective.
Yeah, we've heard that a couple times where it's like the idea of a scoreboard, right? Like at the end of the game, it's a very definitive thing. And when you've been training since, I don't know, 5-6 years old, right? And you're just mentally trained for that, it's hard to find those scoreboards. So before we get into this idea of Marques as the educator, I'd like to talk about, some of the other work you've done as an entrepreneur, as an advisor, maybe even as an investor. What surprised you the most, or what did you learn the most going through some of those different roles before, where you find yourself today?
That's a great question. I think the thing that surprised me the most was that I could really transport a lot of my experience as a player and through that journey into a bunch of these different situations. And, my experience took me from, sports tech industry into the cannabis industry, into education and professional development. And what I found is that it's not necessarily that I'm an expert in any one of these fields, but it's the ability to get in and adapt and be self-aware enough to know and understand, where my strengths are and where I need to improve. That's been the thing that I've been able to repurpose over and over again, and, get into these different industries that, might be, a little bit counterintuitive to most, but still be able to move around and make the impact that I want to make.
Let's go a little bit deeper on that transition. So you mentioned sports tech. I think our listener can understand, why you would be drawn to that as a professional athlete. But then you mentioned cannabis as well. So what did you do within cannabis, and what was that transition like for you, kind of moving from an interest in sports tech into something maybe not quite as conventional?
Yeah, it took me a while to really wrap my mind around it. This had to be around 2013, 2014. An opportunity in a company that was based in Jamaica came along. And, I was still playing at the time, but when you hear cannabis, it's kind of synonymous with Jamaica. So that opportunity just kind of jumped off the page to me. And, the thing that was most interesting to me at the time was like, it wasn't a dispensary. It was like an international wholesale company. So being able to get in as an investor, eventually became an advisor to the company.
Well, tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges that you found that these athletes or the folks that you're teaching face. What are some of the common challenges they're facing, and maybe some ways that you've helped them address it?
For sure. I think we touched on a little bit of it earlier on. I think the the thought process around identity is one that I think is a challenge that a lot of people face and a lot of people go through. Because there's this marrying of who you are and what you do, and sometimes it can be really difficult to distill those things out, right? So as an athlete, it's a lot more pronounced because you show up in a restaurant and the first thing that people mention is your fantasy numbers or hopefully you had a good game. But I think as a young professional, your career and who you are is it's tough to really distill out your professional development from your personal development. So the things that are really prevalent for you as an athlete is you have to be self-aware enough to know where you need to improve to stay on the roster. And I think that approach that's really rooted in self-awareness is one that as we're all kind of moving towards our goals and our ambitions, the ability to continue to not just develop the professional aspirations, but continue to understand where you can develop as an individual. It really accelerates you on your path.
So let's dig on that a little bit deeper. I think even for non-athletes, we hear a lot, follow your heart or, follow your passion. And so to hear you talk through, realizing your identity is more than an athlete, or to try and be self-aware is one thing, but then to actually be able to take the step to figure out what your identity is a whole nother thing. How do you help athletes navigate that step?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just this process, right? And it's funny how much I revert back to, again, that process and becoming an athlete and really sustaining at a high level. It's this self-scouting process, right? And as you're moving day to day, it's really easy to kind of get in this autopilot mode. But if you're able to take the time and really devote the time to understand what it is that you're chasing, understand what it is that you're passionate about, there's not this linear path to where I'm passionate about this, I can go become really successful professionally in this very thing. But a lot of it starts with really identifying what are the things that drive you. What are the skill sets that you have, and how can you distill those things out to where they're no longer just skills and attributes that are tied to a position that you played or tied to a team or a sport. These are things that I feel really confident about in myself and my abilities that I can own wholly. And once you own those things wholly, you can transport them into any vehicle that you want. It could be education, it could be entrepreneurship, it could be your career path. But once you own those things for yourself, now they become tools that you can repurpose over and over again.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this idea of resilience quite a bit, and coming from a player that I think Coach Gruden called tougher than a $2 steak, I think was his quote. This idea of getting knocked down, of trying new things, and if it works, it's great. If not, you power through it. Is that something that you think is just inherent to the athlete experience, or is it something that some people have and they don't, or can it really be taught? Can this idea of resilience be something that you can teach everybody?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it is very inherent to the athlete experience, because there are very seldom going to be times where you go out and you win just across the board. You're going to face some type of adversity. You're going to face some type of a challenge that you can't overcome on the first try. And that's just part of playing sports. And I think that's part of the value in sports, across the board. But, I do think that there is a way that you can teach that kind of resilience. And, the thing that I always focus on is you're going to be resilient about the things that you really care about. right? So getting back to this, ability to really distill out your passions and distill out, your skills and your attributes. If you can really own those things, it gives you a chance to kind of set them as your anchor. And when you do face adversity and you do face the challenges that come along, it's a lot easier to tap into things that are strong suits, as opposed to, try and tap into things that are just kind of untethered from the rest of your being.
Mm-hmm. So I love that we're digging in on the personal journey, but another reality of sport, especially football, is the team dynamic and the group competition. So what role does maybe community or team and like finding that piece of it for pros post-career, like where does that come in?
I think it's a huge part, just because whenever you can get into a community of, whenever you're surrounded by a community of people that share a similar experience, there's just a comfort in that. And there's this level of vulnerability that can exist organically. In speaking with people that are going through the same hardships or going through the same challenges, it's a lot easier to open up and have real, dialogue and real raw conversations that kind of helps move everyone forward. I think that team dynamic is huge. Just the random conversations you have in the locker room, the random ideas that get thrown around. There are more organic conversations that happen in those types of situations than some of really any other situation that I've been in professionally.
Is part of your curriculum or education for the pro athletes then also kind of evaluating who you're surrounding yourself with and how you can be exposed to people that are either going through the same thing you've been through or can relate on some other level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of it is just around this thing I call peripheral awareness. It's something that was really valuable to me playing receiver. You got to understand what's going on around you, or you're going to get your head knocked off. But I think as you're looking to build relationships and you're looking to build community and really be a part of a community, you've got to have enough peripheral awareness to understand like who are the folks that are really on the same level, that we can have these candid conversations with. But who are the folks that are maybe a little bit ahead of me in the journey that I can find and start a dialogue with in a way that is more aspirational. And I think having that balance and having that mix of people that you can have the really candid conversations with and be super raw and vulnerable with are really important. But you've got to be able to surround yourself with people that are a little bit further along in the journey than you are, because they kind of help to keep pulling you along.
Who was that for you as you were making that transition? I know you mentioned obviously you had a few financial advisors that had played or had come from that background, but were there players that you looked to as a beacon and you said, hey, that's a guy that's doing it the right way and somebody that I really look up to and how I want to carry myself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got a chance to join the at the time it was the One Team Collective with the NFLPA as one of the advisors, and that group of guys was interesting because they were kind of peers, but at the same time they were a little bit further ahead in the VC space. So guys like Russell Okung and Isaiah Kaczynski, Dhani Jones, Ryan Mundy, those guys were peers that we could have those conversations, but I realized that they were a little bit further ahead of me in the VC journey.
Yeah.
So they became, people that I looked to, as I was making my moves, how can I kind of, mimic some of the momentum that those guys were able to create.
Marques, you literally just listed off the last 7 of 10 guests that we've had on the game. We haven't gotten Russell Okung yet. I think that's somebody that we definitely need to have on. But yeah, I mean, Isaiah, Eric Winston, these are names. Dhani are names that come up so often with the guys look up to. So I'm glad to hear that.
No doubt about it. Yeah, those guys, man, they've gotten to the places they've gotten obviously really super intelligent guys, and they've been able to navigate in a way that I think they've been able to leverage, their intellect and their position as athletes to the maximum. And that's ultimately what you want to be able to do is own the assets that you have, own them, and put them to work.
Yeah, and I think, but not let it define you entirely, right? Like as you said, use it to get the foot in the door, but you're not just in there for your name and image and likeness. You're there because you understand the platform. If it's VC, you understand the dynamics of it. And I think that's the thing that I think why Tim and I love doing the show and why we get to showcase that, like, hey, it's not that just Isaiah is a former NFL player. It's like, no, he's raised his own venture fund. He has, a decade's worth of angel investing experience. And I think it's how we get to offer people who are sports fans a sense of the fact that, hey, you're not just one thing. You've had the ability to dig into this and really, earn your place at the table, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you hit it. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's when you can get to a place where you can use your former profession as an athlete as an asset. That's how everyone continues to advance their career. They have assets and they know when to deploy them.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome, but the mirror image of that is irrational confidence, which is also something that leads to success for a lot of athletes, and then entrepreneurs, leads to success for them on that. As you build Marques Colston Enterprises, how is that irrational confidence you may have had on the football field now starting to come to fruition after you've put in all this work off the field?
Yeah, I mean, it's how you become an adjunct professor. No, it's to me, it's all about mindset. And, this concept of irrational confidence is the thing that really fueled me and allowed me to become not just somebody that got a foot in the door, had a cup of coffee with the NFL team, but was able to go from a 7th round pick to a 10-year vet that broke every record in team history. That type of experience and that type of trajectory it's not rational, right? And I think the pillars that kind of make up that journey. I talk a lot about the ability to set these ambitious goals. I talk a lot about this peripheral awareness and learning how to master your craft, and kind of being able to anticipate some of the things that are coming your way. It's all in a way to how can you position yourself for success. And once you find that success, how can you sustain it? Mm-hmm. How can you always be a step ahead and really position yourself to where you have the ambition and you have the grit to continue to fight through, some of the tough times, but you also have the strategic mindset to where you can anticipate, where some of the openings are going to be or where some of the roadblocks are going to be, so you can navigate differently. And, if you didn't know I was talking about football for that whole explanation, it's really a strategic roadmap for how you can achieve things in your life and in your career, that a lot of folks would kind of put out of your reach.
Yeah, we've been we had a former NFL player, John McGraw, on a few weeks ago, who chatted about the idea of process orientation versus goal orientation, right? And realizing that, look, very few teams in the NFL go without losing a single game. So that means you're working your tail off, the entire week. You go out there and you get washed. If you're not ready to just pick yourself back up, have that resilience we talked about, and then get back to the grind, it can really unseat you from a mental standpoint, from an effort standpoint. And I think it's such an applicable shift to entrepreneurship, because you're not only going to have good days. Most of the time as an entrepreneur, especially starting out, you're only going to have bad days. And if you don't have that ability to say, okay, I have set the goal and I've made the plan, I think it can really unseat you and maybe make you question a lot of the different choices you're making. So I think it resonates. Everything you were just saying, I think resonates a lot with the entrepreneur's experience, which is you have to set ambitious goals and then you have to create the plan to actually go out and achieve them.
and you've got to be able to have relative success, right? Because the thing that you just mentioned there, most of the days are going to be bad days, right? You know, it is a grind, and in that process orientation, I love that because that's really what it is. And if you have enough awareness, enough self-awareness to know that, you know, it may have been an overall, you know, from the outside looking in, it was a bad day. But if I got from point A to point B today, that's a relative win. And you keep stacking those relative wins, and at some point, it's going to look like a win from the outside as well.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that one of our guests said was when Michael Redd came on, and he talks about during his playing career, he missed a game-winning shot, and reporter sticks a microphone in his face and says, you know, you lost the game, you missed the shot. How's it feel like to fail? Or, you know, something to that effect. And he was like, I think we need to redefine what success looks like. He's like, I'm the starting two guard on the Milwaukee Bucks, and I was the one with the ball in my hand to shoot the game-winning shot. And if it had gone in, great. But at the end of the day, like, that's a success. And Apollo Ono was the same way. Like, when he won the silver medal, it was like, how's it feel to have lost the gold? And he said, I won the silver medal. Like, I won. So being able to contextualize all that and have the relevant success is really the only way you can survive. You know, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think we live in a world today where, you know, it's very easy to show a win. But I think everything you said, you have to be able to contextualize, and you got to have a perspective about yourself that allows you to never get too high with the highs and never get too low with the lows.
Do you have a moment from your playing career or even, you know, post-career that kind of falls along those lines where you felt like maybe you're questioned, but also maybe had a breakthrough for yourself where you're like, oh, I've personally come a long way because I now understand the question in a different way. Like, I don't feel attacked. Not to say you ever did, but just maybe how your mindset has evolved over time with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the best example I can give you is, you know, we were playing in the Super Bowl in 2009 against the Colts. And, you know, I played football since the time I was 7. So like that's the dream. You're living the dream. You know, you kick off, you see the light bulbs flash and like all the cameras flashing in the stands. And, you know, we came out, and literally the first play that was thrown my way, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was an 18-yard hook route. I run my route, I'm wide open. Drew hits me with the pass, and it literally goes through my hands, hits me in the face mask, bounces up in the air. And, you know, from that could have been one of those deflated, like those balloon pop moments, right? You get to this stage, and it's just, from the outside looking in, it's like, man, this game is too big for this guy, right? But again, it's that relative success and that context that allowed me to kind of bounce back from that, you know, let go of the 25, 30-yard game that I had just handed to me on a platter. You know, but just be able to reset, refocus, and kind of get my head back in the game. And, you know, I caught the next one that was thrown my way. And, you know, 7 catches later, we you know, were able to bring a title back to New Orleans. But again, like, never getting too high with the highs and too low with the lows. You know, that perspective and that context is everything.
Yeah, and it's pretty special to be able to look back at that now with that context. It doesn't hurt that you have a Super Bowl ring to go with it, but
always help.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah, so Marques, you've been so gracious with your time with us today, and you know, obviously being one of the inspirations for this podcast itself. It's been such an honor to chat with you. Where we would love to close, and we'd love to ask our guests this, especially since you're an educator now of younger athletes and other athletes that are making the transition. What is some advice that you would have given your younger self? Maybe it was your NFL playing self. Maybe it was your just, you know, in that retirement phase self. What is some advice that you wish you could give your younger self?
It is never too early to start, and never too early to start asking questions. I think a lot of times as athletes, um, we have made a living figuring things out for ourselves. Um, and a lot of those tools that get you to that place where you can be successful and you can make a living. Um, you know, a lot of those same tools hurt you because you get into a mode where you feel like you have to go find all your own answers. And there are individuals out there that want to help. There are learning experiences that you can gain not going through the thing yourself. There are these vicarious learnings that you can find. So yeah, don't start asking questions and start as early as possible. And I will say this, and this is something that's relatively fresh as an entrepreneur. It doesn't have to be perfect. As an athlete, you grind and you grind and you grind for that perfect rep. And while that works on the field, in entrepreneurship is rarely perfect. And you can miss out on a lot of progress and a lot of good growth waiting on perfect.
I mean, that is music to our ears as investors, especially early stage investors, where I think Tim and I get to see, the messy middle for a lot of these companies. It might look like it's great on Twitter and Instagram, and then as an investor, you actually get to see what's happening behind the scenes. You're absolutely right. I mean, that pursuit of perfection shouldn't stop you as an entrepreneur from going out there and realizing what you're doing. And I think the other point that you made, which is, ask a lot of questions and learn vicariously, is why this show exists. Because, we want to showcase those stories and then also be here as a beacon for folks when they decide, hey, it's time for me to hang up the cleats and go do something new. So, Marques, just want to thank you again so much for joining us on the Game Plan today and for sharing your wisdom with us. We're excited to have folks hear your story.
I appreciate you guys having me, man. And anytime, just say the word.
Yeah,
Thanks,
would
Marques.
love to. Thank you.